Yeah, my move into cooking, I guess, was a bit unorthodox. I was actually on a train one day into my job that I didn't really get much out of, and read this really amazing article in the Sunday paper, which I now wish I'd kept, saying that, you know, you determine your calling by which part of the Sunday paper you turn to first, which was a really sweet idea, and for me it was always a restaurant section. And kind of from that moment onwards, this kind of light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, of course, because I've been cooking since I was sort of 7 or 8 years old. I used to bully my mum and dad into kind of like making me cook, letting me cook the family dinners, and they thought I was like the weirdest child ever because I'd be like making weird 80s things like lemon mousse while they were all out playing in the garden, my brothers and sisters. And yeah, I'd been sort of cooking my whole life, but it wasn't something I really considered as, you know, a profession, as a job. And actually from that moment onwards, it was kind of, you know, when you kind of look for a sign in life and you want things to happen quickly, I actually got into work that day and I found this cooking course with this, you know, chef, Jamie Oliver, who at the time, you know, wasn't really that well known. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll apply for that, applied for that, got an interview 2 days later, and then went on a selection weekend that weekend, and then by the following Monday I'd quit my job and I was kind of cooking every day. So it was a real lesson in sort of taking a leap of faith. This book is different in that it's very much taking into account kind of how we live and eat now. You know, it's all well and good to say, you know, roast a chicken on a Tuesday night or whatever, but people, I don't think, have time to do that. I think as a chef and a cook, I get home from work, you know, and have the same time constraints and the same kind of like sometimes low energy levels as other people, and I want my dinner on the table in sort of 10, 20, 30 minutes. And I think as a chef, you kind of have tips and tricks and ways of speeding things up, which mean that you can cook really delicious food really quickly. And I think this book is trying to kind of explain that, trying to, you know, allow people to sort of choreograph their way around the kitchen in a way that's kind of still calm and gentle, but allows flavours to be layered quickly, whether that's using spices or herbs or lemon, you know, to cook something reasonably simple, but also super delicious. What I thought would be useful in this book is to actually put together a series of recipes that were really approachable, you know, on a sort of Wednesday, sort of Thursday night, rather than the kind of sort of big feasts that you have on a Saturday. And yeah, so the book's broken down into different chapters: 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then this chapter called Investment Cooking, which is all about the things that you might be able to do, you know, when you've got a spare hour that actually is going to mean that, you know, you've got some lovely things to rely on for the next week or month. I've kind of tested all the recipes out here at home a few times, but then also I kind of sent them out to all my family and friends, people who are non-cooks, and asked them to time themselves as well, because obviously, you know, when you're a chef, you kind of do have a different mindset and do things a bit quicker. Yeah, so I have. My mum and dad are hilarious. I think they're from a generation where wasting anything, like even like, you know, sort of like a quarter of a tomato is like the most terrible crime. So they're really sweet. They come up here and I do them like little food drops. I just put like little packages of food together and they go home and eat it. So yeah, and a few of the neighbours I think are quite happy that they live next door, because when there's too much food here, because sometimes I'll test 8 or 10 recipes a day, and you know, even with John's, my boyfriend's like voracious appetite, we still can't get through them. So yeah, we do drops kind of to the neighbours next door. A lot of the sweet things have been very popular, which isn't too much of a surprise. There's some really delicious kind of raw cookie dough bars, which are made with Brazil nuts and coconut sugar and coconut oil, which kind of, you know, sort of a healthy but still really delicious sweet treat, and they're kind of studded with dark chocolate, and those have gone down really, really well. There's another little like peanuts, it's actually almond butter, kind of little almond butter chocolate bars, which people also love. And then there's some of the savoury things. There's it's really quick pasta that almost everyone who's picked up the book has kind of cooked, and my mum I think now makes it about 3 times a week. I think my dad's quite bored of it, but it's basically you put the pasta, the tomatoes, the kale, some lemon zest all in one pan and then boil it up together. So it's super easy and takes about 10 minutes. So people have really loved kind of cooking that one. So in my store cupboard, I always have amazing salt. I think that salt, I don't eat any processed food, so I do add a bit of salt to my cooking, and I have a lovely sea salt from Anglesey, which actually is where my boyfriend's from. So it's quite nice, and it's a lovely kind of British ingredient. So, that is something that I always have. I always have a selection of like every kind of spice, probably verging on slightly strange to some people. I have hundreds and hundreds, but I'm a cook, and that's kind of what I do. But I think if people at home have sort of 10 spices that they kind of rotate, then so I always have spices. I always have tinned tomatoes. I think they are a brilliant thing to be able to throw a pasta or a quick sauce together. And then I always have tinned sort of beans and lentils. When I've got time, what I do is cook a huge big pan of beans and actually then freeze them, like a real geek, in little bags in the freezer, which is amazing, because it means when you're reaching into the freezer, you've got something that has been home cooked, that you've put a bit of love and care into. But it's the easiest thing. If you put a pan of beans on the stove, you kind of don't really need to look at it again for another sort of hour or so. And there's just a lovely kind of satisfaction from knowing that I've made those myself. But for emergencies and, really quick meals, I'll have tinned beans. Other things I use all the time, I guess, which isn't really a store cupboard ingredient, but I kind of consider it that, is kind of lemons, limes, oranges, citrus. I love using lemon, and I kind of see it really for me as a third seasoning. So I'll use either the zest or the juice in almost everything I make. Sometimes I swap it up for, some orange or some lime. But again, that kind of layering of flavour that's so important for me in cooking and in feeling satisfied when I've finished a meal, is all about having kind of spicy, sweet, that kind of umami flavour, but then also like the sharpness and the kind of tanginess that you get from citrus. Quite a lot of people have really tiny kitchens these days, especially in London and the bigger cities, because it's just getting more and more expensive to live here. So, and lots of my friends have small kitchens. The house I lived in, the flat I lived in before this had a tiny little kitchen, and my advice would actually just be to kind of really streamline the equipment you have and make sure that every piece of equipment you have kind of really works. I think lots of chefs kind of recommend having lots of fancy pieces of equipment, but for me, like a couple of really good knives, a really good grater, like a microplane or something, a couple of bowls, a couple of baking trays, and a few pans, and really that's kind of all you need. There's loads of chefs I look up to, and I think I've spent 7 years working for Jamie Oliver, so half of my brain is basically a back catalogue of Jamie Oliver recipes, so those kind of come out quite a lot just naturally, and I think the work that Jamie does is, he's just an incredible man. But also I love Nigel Slater. I love how he writes. I just think he's kind of the poet of our time in terms of talking about food, and I love his recipes. They're so simple. Obviously, lots of them have meat and stuff involved, but he still does kind of like really make vegetables sing as well. There's lots of blogs that I follow. I love 101 Cookbooks, which is this beautiful blog written in San Francisco by this lovely lady called Heidi Swanson, who's a friend of mine, and she just writes about incredible, vibrant kind of, vegetable-scented food, but in a really kind of normal way that doesn't make you, sort of think that you've got someone breathing down your neck from a kind of nutrition perspective. And I just think her recipes are so lovely, and I love the kind of Californian style of cooking. So, looking at her blog just is a little means I can tap into California sort of on a grey November day. I also love My New Roots and Sarah Britton. She writes, such wonderful, vibrant kind of recipes as well, and she manages to sort of weave really interesting nutritional information into there, because she's a kind of nutrition expert, without it feeling like it's being rammed down your throat. So they're places I kind of go to a lot, yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say that my kitchen at the moment is my dream kitchen. I think the most important thing for me in a kitchen is a big kitchen table that everyone can sit around. I think definitely, you know, I think when you're a chef and a cook, you want to almost build your own kitchen because you have your own way of working. You know, your stove's there, perhaps you want, you know, all your utensils hanging up on the side. Perhaps you want your work surface to the left-hand side or the right-hand side, depending on, you know, how you chop. So, you know, it's a dream, you know, one day to kind of build a kitchen and kind of make it bespoke to how I'd like it, with lovely kind of marble surfaces and all that kind of stuff. But I love this kitchen. It's kind of where I've written both of my books, you know, it's kind of where I make food for the people I love. So yeah, whilst it's not like totally posh and slick and fancy, it's definitely, you know, it's definitely the heart of our house for sure.